Hello everyone. Today I'm going to show you how to clean data by using Tableau Prep Builder. So I have opened up my Tableau Prep Builder right here, and this is the opening page. So I'm going to go ahead and connect to a data. So I'm going to click to connect to data. Okay, I'm going to open up an Excel file right here. Okay, and it's going to be the donation data, and I'm going to do it for the state of California. Okay, so I'm going to click on and say open. And while Tableau is opening, I'm going to show you how the actual Excel sheet looks like. Okay, so this is the Tableau public data that they have provided, plus in addition, I have something that I had added here as columns, which from my experience with working with a nonprofit organization that they had done, I had given some information that I could add that is probably going to be helpful in terms of cleaning data here. Okay, so let's go over the columns one by one and try to see what it means. Okay, you can see that they're pretty much standard. You have the city, you have the demographic, which is upper, middle, and mid-upper class. You have the donation amount, you have the donation date, and you have the proposed donor potential model. You have your donor ID, donor potential, whether it's not specified, high, low, medium. You have your postal code, your region, and the state. And now you have right here a series of questions, okay? And if you look carefully, it's actually one question, but has 5 different answer choices. So it asks, how likely are you to donate again within the next 6 months? And A, it is very unlikely. B is somewhat unlikely. C is neither unlikely nor likely. And D is somewhat likely. And E, very likely. Okay, so this is something that obviously a donating organization could ask the donor. Okay, and the donor is going to answer either very unlikely, somewhat likely, or etc. and so on. And the answer choices, you could see that it is going to be 1, 2, 3, or 5. And you can see that it's the same question, but the answer choices are all kind of divided into several different columns. So in this case, you could see that you could actually do a pivot. So that is, you could combine these 5 columns into one. Okay, so we'll probably show you how to do that. And the next column, it seems that there's an installment. Okay, installment is 0 or 1, and if you see if it's a 1, it has 3 different dates. Okay, and yes, again, if it's 1, now you have 3 different dates and etc. and so on. Okay, what this is indicating is that obviously a donor can place an installment on their donation. So that is, if it's 1, it means that they're going to be donating on 3 separate occasions. And at least for in this organization, how they did it is that, okay, if it was an installment and you're going to be donating $754, what it means is that I place an installment on February 2nd. It's going to be $754, and that is $754 is going to be donated on February 2nd. Another $754 is going to be donated on March 2nd, and the last donation is going to be happening on April 2nd. So it is 3 separate $754, okay? So if you put it this way, obviously you could see that there needs to be some data cleansing because what you're receiving is not $754, it's actually 754 multiplied by 3 times, and they're not going to be all coming in on February 2nd. 754 is coming on Feb 2nd, another 754 is March 2nd, and another is going to be coming in on April 2nd. So that is, you could see that you may need to come up with more lines or more rows in this case in terms of 754. Okay, so that's the understanding of the data itself. And now let's go to Tableau Prep Builder and actually do the data cleansing. Okay, first off, I want to do some data cleansing, and the first one that you would like to do is that click on this plus button, do an add step. Okay, so click on this plus button, and I'm going to do an add step here. Okay, and what is good about Tableau Prep Builder is that now you can see each of the columns and each of the values that each columns have. Okay, And for the city part, you could see that they're pretty standard cities. There's nothing wrong with cities. It doesn't seem that there's any misspelled or anything like that. Or you could see that there's Palo Alto, Palo Alto. That's the same thing. So you might want to consider combining them. But if you don't, that's also fine. Okay. And you could see that, but however, for demographics, you could see that there's mid-class, middle, and middle class right here. And you might want to consider combining them. And for donation amount, you could see that there is a negative donation, so maybe you want to get rid of that too. And there's a donation date that is null, so maybe you want to take that out as well. And for potential donor, proposed donor potential model, you could see that moderate and moderate slightly misspelled, but you might want to also say that's actually meaning the same thing. In terms of donor ID, there's some nulls. Maybe you want to get rid of that too. And for donor potential, there's high and a high. Maybe you want to combine that too. There's a postal code, regions, state, etc. And they're pretty much standard and there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, so I'm going to start doing the cleansing here. So first off, I'm going to combine mid-class, middle, and middle class. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to click on this More Option button. And I'm going to click on Group and Replace. Okay, so I'm going to manually select them. Okay, and I'm going to manually select middle class, mid class, and middle, and I'm going to group them. Okay, so I'm going to say I'm going to be done. Okay, once I have done that, you could see that I only now have 3 classes: middle class, upper class, middle, upper middle class. And the good thing about Tableau Prep Builder is that whenever you make a change, it actually indicates what type of change that you have done, and it could show that 2 values have been replaced with middle class, which is exactly what I wanted to do. Okay, so now let's go to donation amount. For donation amount, remember I do not want to have the negative value. So I'm going to go to more options and I can do a filter and I'm going to set ranges of values. And rather than having negative 10,000, I'm going to go from 0. And it seems that the maximum is going to be 110,000. So I'm going to say I'm done. Okay. So once I have done so, now you can see that there are no negative values. And if I go back to here and change, you can see that, yes, I have made a change in terms of range and I'm going to keep only from 0 to 110,000. Okay, now let's go back to the donation date. Remember, I'm going to take out the null donation dates. I could click on exclude right here. Okay, or I could click on the options button and I could say that, okay, I'm going to take out, I'm going to take out the null values. Okay, so it says keep only, so I'm going to keep the non-null values. Okay, so I click that and say okay. And now here, if I go to proposed donor potential model, there were some misspelled, so I need to do some grouping again. So while I do some grouping, I could do pronunciation, common characters, or spelling. Let's probably try pronunciation here, because moderate and moderate, it seems that they're pretty much the same spelling. Okay, and once I did that, it seemed that Tableau Prep Builder automatically recognized that and just placed moderate. Okay, and I'm gonna say done. Okay, I did done for moderate. Now let's go to donor ID. Again, I'm going to exclude the donor ID that is of null value, so I'm going to click on exclude there. And for donor potentials, there's high and high, and remember I'm going to be grouping them. So again, let's do a manual selection, and I'm going to select high, and I'm done. Okay, and remember for the postal codes and the other information, I probably didn't need to do any changes, so I'm going to be good to go. Okay, so I did the very basic cleansing, and this part itself is very powerful in terms of Tableau Prep Builder. But the next part that I would like to do is that if you remember, there was the question that you asked, how likely are you going to be donating again within the next 6 months? And if you remember, I wanted to do a pivot on this because I do not need 5 columns. Okay, so what I'm going to do is click on this plus. Let's go back to the first page here and click on this plus button again, and I'm going to do an add pivot. Okay, once I do an add pivot, Okay, you could see that there's a pivot field that is appearing, and it is asking me to drop fields right here. And if you remember, the 5 question that I wanted to be 1 is right here. How likely are you going to donate again in the next 6 months, going from A, B, C, D, and E. Okay, so I'm going to select these 5, and I'm going to be dragging and drop to pivot field. Okay, once I have done so, you could see that my pivot field is here. Let's probably try to make sure that you see these 2 fields. So I have the pivot 1 values and pivot 1 name. Okay, and rather than calling it pivot 1 name, it is actually 1 question. How likely are you going to be donating in the next 6 months? So I'm going to probably just rename this. Okay, so I'm going to rename this field as, because it was asked as a question, let's say donation likelihood. Okay, and it was for 6 months. Okay, so that's going to be my new name. Okay, and rather than calling it pivot 1 field, pivot 1 values, let's probably rename this, okay, and call it donation scale. Okay, if you remember, it was going from 1 to 5, and that was the scale. So let's probably say parentheses 1 to 5. Okay. Now you could see that there's a whole lot of zeros, okay? And do I really need this 0 because I have all captured each of their donation likelihood from 1 through 5? Okay, so you could see that I actually do not need this 0 anymore. So I could actually, in fact, take all these 0 out, or I'm going to be excluding them, okay? So I'm going to all exclude those 0 values. And now I'm going to be only left with 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay. Now this is actually quite important in terms of understanding how many rows that you have. Okay. Now remember, once I did my cleaning, I had 1,012 rows. Okay. For pivot 1, now because I have included the zeros, I still have 1,012 rows, which is identical, which is the correct value that I would like to have. Okay, so we're good to go. Okay, so now I have done a pivot and I have created a donation likelihood in 6 months. That's a new column, and it's going to be having a scale of 1 through 5. Okay, so that's good. Okay, now if you remember, there was one more pivot that I need to do in terms of installment and the installment dates. Okay, so because I need to do another pivot, I'm going to click here, do another pivot. Okay, so add or click on this plus button and add a pivot. Okay, and because I'm doing a pivot on pivot 1, which was done on the question, okay, now I do not see the question anymore, but it still asks for the pivot field that I want to drag. And again, it's going to be from installment 1 through 3. Okay, so I'm going to drag and drop this. Okay, and once I have dragged and dropped it, you could see that it's giving me pivot 1 name and installment of. It's not really giving me much information, but now you will probably need to come up with the real name. So I'm going to rename this field again. Okay, and obviously you could see that this are the donation date of installments. Okay, so I'm going to call this donation date installment. Okay, so whenever there was an installment, I have a separate donation date. Okay, and for pivot 1 name, okay, it's just telling me the donation period, so 1 through 3. So I'm going to rename this as installment period. Installment period. Okay, so there you go. Okay, now let's go back to here donation dates. Okay, so there's a whole lot of nulls. Okay, and now you can clearly see, very similar to the question that we had for table 1 here, or pivot table 1 here, I took out all the zero values, okay? And if you look at all this null values, these are the people that actually didn't do any installments. So we really don't need to keep them in our data set. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be excluding all these nulls. Okay, so once I exclude all these nulls, okay, now you could see that I have 246 cases of installments. Okay, so I have 246 additional rows, but if you could see, if you compare that with pivot 1 where it has 1012 and clean 1 that also had 1012, so obviously in this case it's 246, but however, remember, not everybody placed an installment. Okay, so 246 seems to be the right value. Okay, and if you remember, installment happened in threes, which means that if I divide 246 by 3, which is going to be 82, that's going to indicate that there are 82 individuals who had placed an installment. Okay, so that is good. Okay, so now what I'm going to need to do is that I'm going to need to join pivot 1 and pivot 2. So I'm going to need to join these two tables where I'm going to join pivot 2 where it has the installment information and join it to pivot 1. Okay, so how to join is that I'm going to drag pivot 1 to pivot 2. You could do the other way around, but I'm going to drag pivot 1 to pivot 2. And we're not going to do a union, we're going to do a join. As I hover around pivot 2, you could see that I could choose join or union, but I'm going to do a join. So I'm going to do to join and I'm going to drop. And once I have done so, it seems that Tableau automatically joins an inner join and it joins by donor ID. Okay, but you could see that the join key donor ID may not be all that correct, and also doing an inner join may not be all that correct either. For this case, if you remember, I want to keep all the information for pivot 1, and from pivot 2, which were the installments, attach that to pivot 1. So it should not be an inner join, it should actually be a right join. Okay, so now I'm going to click on a right join because I do want to have the information from original pivot table 1. Okay, in terms of the joining keys, okay, if I do a donor ID join, that's not going to be 100% correct. I also need to join by the installments because I'm going to be joining based on the installments based on the donors. Okay, so once I have done so, okay, that's going to be the correct join because I'm again joining by the installments by the same donor IDs. Okay, and how do I know whether this is correct or not? Okay, so you could see that there's a summary of join that is showing you. Okay, so that is, remember the original pivot 1 had 1012 observations. Pivot 2, those are the installments that had 246. Okay, and the resulting join gives me 1176. Now this is the correct value. Okay, why is that? Okay, if you remember, there were 82 cases that were installments, okay, and that had been installment of 3, so that's why we had 246. So if I add 246, 1012, subtract that by the 82, then I get 1176. Okay, so I get the correct joins. Okay, so now I'm pretty much finished. I have cleaned the data for any misspellings and so on. I have did a pivot for the one question that was asking how likely are you going to be donated within the next 6 months. I have also did a pivot on the installments because I wanted to get the correct amount that was associated. Okay, and now I have done that with the join by the donor ID and the installments. Okay, now I have the final result, so I'm going to do a final output on it. So I'm going to click on this plus button, and I can do an add output. And once I did an output, I could save it to file, or I could publish as a public data, or whatever that you would like to choose. And I could do it as a output type. I could do it as a Tableau data extract, or I could save it as a CSV file. Okay, so that probably wraps up how you could do data cleaning using Tableau Prep Builder. You could do it for just cleaning datas. You could do it for transposing, or you could do it for pivoting, and you could also do it for joining. I think it's going to be a very powerful tool, so hopefully that this video was very helpful for you. Okay, all right, thank you. Bye-bye.